His son's first steps weren't toward their father, they were toward the woman on her knees. The mansion was silent that afternoon, too silent for a home with two young children inside. Then Ethan Marshall heard something that made no sense: laughter. He stopped in the marble hallway, still holding his phone mid-conversation with Tokyo. The sound came again, light and broken, like bells that had forgotten how to ring. His briefcase slipped from his grip and thudded against the floor. Ethan moved toward the arched doorway of the living room, his heart suddenly loud in his chest. When he looked inside, the world tilted. His sons were standing. Noah and Lucas, born with bodies that refused to obey, were on their feet, swaying slightly, their small hands reaching forward. Their legs trembled but held. Their faces, usually empty and distant, were bright with something Ethan hadn't seen in 2 years: joy. And they were reaching toward Grace. The maid knelt on the polished wood floor, still wearing her blue uniform and white apron. Her cleaning gloves lay discarded beside her. Both of her arms were open wide, and her voice, soft and steady, filled the room like a hymn. "That's it, my loves. Come to me. God's got you." Noah took a step, then Lucas. Ethan's throat closed. His chest felt crushed under the weight of what he was seeing. His sons, the ones neurologists said would never move independently, were walking, not toward him, toward her. Grace didn't notice him standing there. Her eyes stayed locked on the boys, her smile gentle and unshaken, as though she had been expecting this all along. "Come on, babies. One more step. Just one more." Lucas giggled. It was a sound so fragile and pure that Ethan had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. For 2 years, he had been told there was no hope. Specialists in 3 countries had shown him scans, charts, and data that all said the same thing. Noah and Lucas would never walk, never speak, never connect. Their bodies functioned, but their spirits, the doctors said, had been locked away at birth. Ethan had spent millions, private therapists, experimental treatments, machines that hummed and blinked through the night. He had built an empire on solving problems, on turning impossibilities into victories. But he couldn't solve this. His wife Caroline had believed in miracles. She used to pray every night, her hands resting on her belly, whispering promises to the babies inside. She died, bringing them into the world, and when she did, Ethan buried his faith with her. He stopped praying, stopped hoping. He hired professionals to manage his son's care and buried himself in work. The mansion became a sterile place, a monument to control and routine. No mess, no noise, no risk of more pain. But now, standing in the doorway, watching his sons take impossible steps toward a woman he barely knew, everything inside him cracked open. Grace caught Noah as he stumbled forward into her arms. She held him close, kissing the top of his head, and then reached for Lucas, who fell into her other arm. "There you are," she whispered. "I knew you could do it." Ethan stepped back before anyone saw him. His hand found the wall and he leaned against it, his breath shallow and fast. The hallway stretched long and cold behind him. The portraits of his ancestors stared down with painted eyes that had seen generations come and go, but none of them had seen this. He walked slowly toward his office, his shoes silent on the marble. The house felt different now, like it was waking up, like something holy had slipped through the cracks he'd spent 2 years sealing shut. Inside his office, Ethan sat behind the wide mahogany desk his father had left him. He stared at the wall, at the framed magazine covers that showed his face next to headlines about innovation and power. None of it mattered. He pressed his palms flat against the desk and closed his eyes. Caroline's voice echoed in his memory, soft and sure. "Ethan, some things can't be bought. Some things can only be believed." He had dismissed her faith as weakness. Now he wondered if it had been strength. The image of his sons wouldn't leave his mind, their shaking legs, their reaching hands, the way they had looked at Grace, not with confusion, but with trust. She had done something he couldn't. She had made them feel safe enough to try. Ethan stood and moved to the window overlooking the gardens. The late afternoon sun painted the lawn gold. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear faint laughter drifting through the halls. He didn't understand what had just happened. Science couldn't explain it. Logic couldn't hold it. But it was real. and for the first time since Caroline died, Ethan Marshall felt something stir in his chest that he thought was gone forever. Hope. Before we go further, subscribe now, like and share this story to your fellow story lovers, and tell us in the comment where in the world you're watching from. But hope was something Ethan Marshall had learned not to trust. To understand why this moment broke him, you have to go back. Back to the day the twins were born. Back to the moment the monitors went silent and Caroline's hand went cold in his. Back to the night he made a promise to control everything so he would never hurt like that again. This is how a man built walls so high that even miracles had to fight to get in. Grace Walker had been working in the Marshall mansion for 3 weeks before Ethan truly noticed her. She wasn't like the others. The previous housekeepers had been efficient and distant, treating the twins like fragile objects to be worked around. They cleaned in silence, kept their distance, and left promptly at 5. Grace was different. Every morning at 9 o'clock, after the nurses finished their rounds and the physical therapist packed their equipment, Grace would enter the twins' room. Ethan first observed this by accident. Passing through the hallway on his way to a conference call, he paused. Through the half-open door, he watched her kneel on the carpet between Noah and Lucas, who sat propped in their specialized chairs, their eyes unfocused and distant as always. Grace slowly removed her blue cleaning gloves and set them aside. Then she reached forward and took each boy's hand in hers. "Good morning, Noah. Good morning, Lucas," she said, her voice clear and warm. "The Lord has given us another beautiful day." She bowed her head. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, his phone buzzing silently in his pocket. He had never seen anyone pray over his sons before, not since Caroline. Grace's voice was barely a whisper, but he caught fragments. "Father, I thank you for these precious boys. I thank you that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. I speak life over their bodies. I speak movement over their limbs. I speak words over their tongues." When she finished, she began to sing. It was an old hymn, one Ethan vaguely remembered from childhood church services he'd long forgotten. Her voice was untrained but sincere, filling the room with something the expensive sound system and therapeutic music recordings had never achieved. Warmth. Ethan watched for another moment, then forced himself to walk away. It was probably nothing. Just a religious woman doing what religious people do. It wouldn't change anything. But over the following days, he began to notice things. Small things at first. The nurses mentioned that Noah's fingers had twitched during one of Grace's visits. A doctor dismissed it as involuntary muscle spasm. Then Lucas made eye contact with Grace during one of her morning sessions, tracking her face as she moved. The physical therapist noted it in his chart but offered no explanation. "They're just more relaxed around her," one nurse suggested. "Coincidence," another said. But Ethan saw it himself one afternoon when he deliberately walked past the twins' room during Grace's time with them. Lucas, who typically stared blankly at the ceiling, was watching Grace's face. His expression, usually slack and empty, held something that looked almost like recognition. Grace was speaking scripture over them, her hands resting gently on their shoulders. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." Her voice carried absolute conviction. "You are not broken, babies. You are being made whole." She spoke to them as if they understood every word, as if they were normal children who could respond, laugh, and run. She treated their condition like a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent diagnosis. It infuriated him. 3 days after he witnessed his sons walking, Ethan finally confronted her. He found Grace in the twins' room during her afternoon routine. She was kneeling again, this time singing softly while she traced gentle circles on Lucas's palm. Noah sat beside her, his head tilted slightly toward her voice. "Grace." She looked up, startled but composed. "Mr. Marshall, I didn't hear you come in." "What exactly are you doing with my children?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Grace stood slowly, smoothing her apron. "I'm caring for them, sir." "The nurses care for them. The therapists care for them. You're hired to clean." "Yes, sir." She held his gaze without flinching. "But they need more than clean rooms. They need medical intervention, science, treatment plans. He gestured toward the expensive equipment lining the walls. Not prayers and songs. With respect, Mr. Marshall, they've had medical intervention for 2 years. Maybe they need something medicine can't provide. And what's that? Love, she said simply. Someone who sees them as whole, not broken. Someone who believes they can be more than their diagnosis. Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. You don't understand their condition. Doctors from 3 countries have examined them. This isn't something faith can fix. Grace's expression softened. I'm not trying to fix them, sir. I'm just loving them. The simplicity of her answer disarmed him. He stood there, words failing, while she watched him with eyes that held no judgment, only a quiet sadness. You think I don't love my sons, he finally said. I think you're afraid to, she replied gently, because loving them means hoping for them, and hope feels dangerous when you've already lost so much. The words struck something deep inside him. For a moment, he saw Caroline's face, heard her voice, felt the weight of the promise he'd made at her graveside. Never again. Never let anyone or anything hurt like that again. He turned and left without another word. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan walked the halls of his mansion. The house felt different in darkness, less like a fortress and more like a tomb. He found himself drawn toward the twins' room, though visiting them at night violated his carefully maintained routine. The door was cracked open. A soft light glowed from within. Grace was there, kneeling between the twins' beds. She hadn't seen him. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped, her voice barely audible. Lord, I don't understand your ways, but I trust them. These boys carry a purpose I can't see yet. Their father's heart is so broken, Father, so closed. Please don't let him see me. Don't let him praise me for what only you can do. Let him see you. Let this miracle point to you alone. She paused, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. I know what it's like to lose a child. I know what it's like to bury hope. But you taught me that healing doesn't start in the body. It starts in the soul. So I'm asking you, heal this family's soul first, then let the rest follow. Ethan backed away from the door, his heart pounding. He retreated to his office, but her words followed him, circling his mind like birds that refused to land. She had lost a child. Her faith wasn't built on comfort or naivety. It was built on something harder, something forged in the same fire that had burned him. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan Marshall began to question everything he thought he knew about healing, hope, and what it truly meant to be whole. The doctors arrived 2 days later. Ethan had made the calls himself, summoning the specialists who had once declared his sons beyond hope. Dr. Philip Brennan flew in from Boston. Dr. Sarah Chen came from San Francisco. They brought equipment, assistance, and the kind of clinical certainty that had once comforted him. Now it felt invasive. They set up in the twins' room, transforming the space into a sterile observation center, cameras, monitors, clipboards. The twins sat in their chairs, wide-eyed and tense, while strangers in white coats measured their reflexes and took notes. This is remarkable, Dr. Brennan said, reviewing footage of the boys taking steps. Unprecedented, really. We need to document everything, run full neurological scans. This could change how we understand pediatric paralysis. We should publish, Dr. Chen added, her eyes bright with academic hunger. A case study like this, it's career-defining. We'll need consent forms, media releases. No, Grace said from the doorway. Everyone turned. She stood with her hands folded, still wearing her maid's uniform, looking small against the crowd of credentialed professionals. Dr. Brennan frowned. I'm sorry, who are you? Grace Walker, I help care for the boys. The maid, Dr. Chen said, her tone making it clear she didn't understand why Grace was speaking. We're conducting a medical evaluation. You can resume your duties later. With respect, they're frightened, Grace said quietly. All these machines and strangers, they need calm, not more tests. Dr. Brennan looked at Ethan. Mr. Marshall, we need to understand what triggered this development. Environmental factors, dietary changes, any new medications. It wasn't medicine, Grace said. The room went silent. Then what was it? Dr. Chen's voice carried a sharp edge. Grace met her gaze steadily. Faith. Dr. Brennan laughed, a short bark of dismissal. Faith doesn't repair neural pathways. We're talking about documented physical changes that require scientific explanation. Some things can't be measured, Grace replied. Everything can be measured, Dr. Chen countered. That's the foundation of medicine. If you've been doing something therapeutic, some technique we're not aware of, I've been praying. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Brennan exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen, then turned to Ethan. Mr. Marshall, I think we should conduct our evaluation in a controlled environment, without interference. Ethan looked at Grace, then at his sons. Noah and Lucas sat rigid in their chairs, their earlier joy replaced with visible distress. Their eyes weren't on the doctors. They were searching for Grace. Everyone out, Ethan said quietly. I'm sorry? Dr. Brennan blinked. Out, now, all of you. The doctors protested, but Ethan was already ushering them toward the door. When they were gone, he closed it and turned to face Grace. The twins immediately relaxed, their eyes finding her across the room. They want to give you credit, Ethan said, his voice tight. Write papers about you. Put your name in medical journals. You could be famous, wealthy. Why won't you let them? Grace shook her head. Because it's not mine to claim. Then whose is it? God's. Ethan felt frustration surge through him. That's not an answer. That's an excuse to avoid explaining what actually happened. It's the only answer I have, Grace said simply. I can't tell them how the boys are healing because I don't fully understand it myself. All I know is that I prayed, and God answered. That's not enough. People need more than that. I need more than that. Why? Grace's question was gentle but direct. Why do you need to understand it? Why can't you just receive it? Because I built my entire life on understanding things, on solving problems, on making sense of the senseless. His voice rose. My wife died, and I couldn't save her. My sons were born broken, and I couldn't fix them. And now you're standing here telling me that prayer, something I abandoned years ago, did what billions of dollars couldn't do. I'm not telling you that to hurt you, Mr. Marshall. Then why? Why show up in my house and turn everything upside down? I didn't plan any of this, Grace said quietly. I just showed up every day and loved your sons, that's all. The rest is between them and God. Over the following days, the pattern became undeniable. The twins responded to Grace in ways they ignored everyone else. When nurses tried to guide them through movements, the boys remained passive. When therapists called their names, there was no reaction. But when Grace entered the room, Noah and Lucas came alive. They turned their heads at the sound of her voice. They reached for her when she knelt. They attempted steps only when she encouraged them. Ethan watched it happen again and again, each instance cutting deeper. His sons knew her voice better than they knew his. They trusted her presence more than his money, his resources, his desperate attempts to orchestrate their healing from a distance. He had been absent without ever leaving. One evening, after another failed attempt to engage his sons during a therapy session, Ethan found himself standing outside their room, gripping the doorframe until his knuckles went white. Inside, Grace was singing again. The twins were attempting to stand, their legs shaking but holding. She had her arms open, waiting, believing they could reach her, and they were trying. Something inside Ethan shattered. He walked into the room, fell to his knees beside Grace, and for the first time in 2 years, he prayed. The words came broken and raw. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to hope again. I'm afraid if I believe they'll be okay, I'll lose them too. Like I lost Caroline. Like I lost everything that mattered. Grace's hand found his shoulder. You don't need to understand, Mr. Marshall. You just need to show up, not as their provider, as their father. Ethan looked at his sons through blurred vision. Noah was watching him, really watching him, with an expression that looked like recognition, like forgiveness. I don't know if I remember how, Ethan whispered. Then learn, Grace said gently. Start now. Start here. That night, a storm rolled across the estate. Thunder rattled the windows. Lightning split the darkness. In the nursery, the twins woke frightened, their small cries echoing down the hallway. Ethan reached their room first, but Grace was already there, kneeling between their beds. "It's okay, babies," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. "God's got you. He's bigger than any storm." The twins trembled, reaching for her. But this time, when Ethan knelt beside Grace, they reached for him too. Noah's small hand found his father's. Lucas's fingers curled around Ethan's thumb. Outside, thunder shook the foundations. Inside, something older and stronger than fear began to build. Grace looked at Ethan, then at the boys. "Let's pray together." And in that moment, with the storm raging and his sons trembling in the darkness, Ethan Marshall finally surrendered. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the world clean and quiet. Morning light filtered through the nursery windows, soft and golden. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in the chair beside his sons' beds, watching them breathe, afraid that if he looked away, the fragile progress they'd made would vanish like smoke. Grace arrived at her usual time, surprised to find him there. "Mr. Marshall, did you stay all night?" "I couldn't leave them," he said simply. Something in her expression softened. She nodded, set down her bag, and removed her gloves. "Then let's start the morning right." She knelt on the carpet between the twins' beds. Ethan watched as she bowed her head and began to pray, her voice filling the room with quiet strength. "Father, we thank you for bringing us through the storm. We thank you for these precious boys and for the healing you've already begun. We ask that you finish what you've started, not for our glory, but for yours." When she finished, she looked up at Noah and Lucas, who were both awake and watching her. "Good morning, my loves," she said, opening her arms wide. "Are you ready?" "Ready for what?" Ethan wanted to ask, but he held his silence. Grace stood and moved to the center of the room, then knelt again on the soft carpet. She stretched her arms toward the twins, her face radiant with expectation. "Come, babies," she whispered. "God is with you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Noah moved. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, his legs shifting beneath him. Lucas followed, mimicking his brother's movements. Both boys were shaking, their faces tight with concentration and something else, determination. "That's it," Grace encouraged, her voice never wavering. "You can do this. One step, just one." Noah placed one foot forward, then another. His balance wavered, but he didn't fall. Lucas stood beside him, his small body swaying but holding. They were standing. Ethan rose from his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Grace, shh," she said gently, her eyes never leaving the boys. "Let them come." Noah took another step, then Lucas. Their movements were unsteady, awkward, beautiful. They walked like children, learning the world for the first time, which in a way, they were. Step by step, they crossed the space between their beds and Grace's open arms. When they reached her, when their small bodies fell into her embrace, Ethan's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, his hands covering his face, and for the first time since Caroline's funeral, he wept. Not the silent tears he'd shed in private, but deep, wrenching sobs that tore through years of buried grief. Grace held the twins close, tears streaming down her own face. "Thank you, Jesus," she whispered. "Thank you." Noah turned in her arms and looked at his father. His mouth moved, forming sounds that had never come before. "Da," he said, the syllable broken but unmistakable. "Da, da," Lucas echoed his brother. "Da, da." Ethan reached for them, and the boys came to him, walking those few impossible steps into their father's arms. He held them against his chest, feeling their heartbeats, their breath, the solid reality of their presence. "I'm here," he whispered into their hair. "I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't before, but I'm here now." Grace watched, her hands clasped in prayer, her face shining with joy that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with gratitude. The weeks that followed brought changes no medical journal could fully document. The twins' progress continued. Their steps grew steadier, their words multiplied. Mama for Grace, Dada for Ethan. More, please. Up. Each word a gift, each sentence a small resurrection. But more than that, they laughed. The mansion, which had been silent for so long, filled with the sound of children's laughter. It echoed through marble hallways, bounced off vaulted ceilings, and breathed life into rooms that had felt like tombs. Ethan transformed too. He canceled meetings to have breakfast with his sons. He moved his office hours to accommodate their therapy sessions, not to observe from a distance, but to participate. He learned to kneel on the floor, to play, to pray. Every morning, he joined Grace in the nursery for prayers. The ritual that had once felt foreign became the anchor of his day. He learned the hymns she sang. He memorized the scriptures she spoke over the boys. He learned to hope again. One afternoon, Dr. Brennan called with an offer. A prestigious medical research position had opened at Johns Hopkins. They wanted Grace to consult, to explain her methods, to teach others whatever technique she'd used. The salary was extraordinary. The recognition would be worldwide. Grace declined without hesitation. When Ethan asked her why, she smiled. Because my place is here, with Noah and Lucas, with you. This isn't a job I can leave. It's a calling I choose to stay. Ethan stood at the window of his office, watching her words settle into his understanding. When he turned back, his expression was open in a way it hadn't been in years. Then don't be the maid, he said quietly. Be family. Stay with us not as an employee, but as part of this home. These boys need you. I need you. Not to work for us, but to walk beside us. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Marshall? Ethan, he corrected gently. And I mean it, Grace. You gave us our lives back. Let us share ours with you. She nodded, unable to speak, and he saw in her face the same gratitude he felt in his own heart. 3 months after the impossible became reality, Ethan stood in the garden behind the mansion, pushing his sons on the swings Grace had insisted they install. Noah and Lucas shrieked with laughter, their legs pumping, their voices loud and joyful. They called to each other in broken sentences that grew clearer every day. Higher, Dada. Watch me. Push Lucas too. Grace sat on a nearby bench, a book of hymns in her lap, watching the scene with quiet contentment. The afternoon sun warmed her face, and when Ethan caught her eye, she smiled. He smiled back, then returned his attention to his sons. He pushed them higher, their laughter mixing with birdsong and breeze, and he thought about miracles. How they don't answer to money or power or control. How they respond to something simpler and infinitely more costly. Humility, presence, love. He thought about Caroline, and for the first time, the memory didn't bring only pain. She would have loved this moment. She would have loved seeing their sons. This way, whole and laughing and alive. Maybe she could see it. Maybe heaven had windows. Ethan whispered a prayer of thanks, words that came easier now, and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, the kind that surpasses understanding. The kind that comes not from controlling life, but from surrendering to the one who holds it. Behind him, Grace began to sing. The twins joined in, their voices young and off-key and perfect. And Ethan, the man who had built an empire on being in control, simply let go and pushed his sons toward the sky.